Welcome, friends, one and all, to American Freedom Radio. You're here where your truth is presented on a daily and hourly basis, and it's my pleasure to be sharing with you for the next 2 hours. You're with Santos Bonacci, and it's the 9th of April, Tuesday, 12 p.m. I was thrown off because of daylight saving this week here in Melbourne, and I thought that today's show would go on an hour after, but it's an hour earlier, so I was caught on another show and just came over in time to start today's show. Now, today we have very special guest listeners, friends. We have Dr. Judy Wood, and I'm going to read portions of Dr. Judy's bio. And if you're not familiar with Dr. Judy, we'll have some great websites for you to go to. For instance, wheredidthetowers.go.com. Where did the towers go? One word, .com. And main website is drjudywood.com. So you might want to just pull the browser up and so you know who's talking today. But Dr. Judy Wood earned a PhD degree from Virginia Tech and is a former professor of mechanical engineering. She has research expertise in experimental stress analysis, structural mechanics, deformation analysis, materials characterization and materials engineering science.
Hello?
Myself. Hello, are you there, Dr. Judy?
Partly.
Ah, lovely. I got dropped off too, so I don't know what went over the airway. This has been happening for a couple of weeks now, so we'll just have to deal with this as much as we can. My apologies, Dr. Judy, but read your bio out, but I think it's chopped. We're going to lose some time. Yeah, so perhaps if you can go straight into it and share with us your insights as to the incident of 9/11, etc. So over to you, please.
Okay. My area of expertise is in the area of materials characterization of new materials. That is, being able to identify the properties of materials we've never seen before. Which pretty much, corresponds to what happened in 11. Most people do, which is you start out with a theory and then go cherry-picking the data to support the theory. And so you're really just proving what you set out to prove. You're not really getting anywhere. And, the area of identifying properties of materials you've never seen before, it's so important to first collect the data and use deductive reasoning to come up with the conclusion, to proceed to the conclusions. As I say, let the evidence lead to the conclusions and not let the conclusions color the evidence. And let's start with what happened on that day. Well, we didn't ever learn what happened that day. In order to conduct a scientific investigation, you need to begin with determining what happened, what problem are you solving. And only then can you proceed to how it was done after you define what it is. And only then can you determine who did it or who is involved and why they did it. But, of course, before noon on 9/11, we were told who and how and why, but before we understood what, before anyone determined what.
Exactly.
And, that's the key to, I think, about every cover-up. What you do is you trick people into assuming, in other words, they're solving, and they can never solve the problem. They just go round circles and never be able to solve it until they determine what happened.
Lovely. So I did miss a lot of what you said, Dr. Judy. Please don't be deterred by the constant dropping off that we're having here. It's going to be a very big challenge for us to get through today's show. Okay, so if you find that I'm not responding to you, that's because I can't hear you and I'm dropping off. So I missed a lot of what you said, and I'll just have to go by ear here. But so we're dealing with the what happened. Now, all right, this is the first thing that we should be tackling before we do who and how and everything else. Now, I've watched quite a few, presentations and documentaries on 9/11, and they speak a lot about thermate and what's the other one? What's the relative of thermate?
Thermite.
Thermite, sorry.
And then, they also talk about nukes. Those are the popular speculation theories, whatever you're going to call them.
Yes, and I've seen those over and over again. So can you elaborate on what? Let's go with the what, and help me to see that, because there sure is enough confusing, convoluted information out there. So if I missed that, I'm sorry, and if you've already said that.
That's okay. It's important. The biggest thing to get out of tonight for any of the listeners is to first identify what problem you're solving. You can't solve a problem until you identify what it is. I like to give the example, the answer is 27. Am I right or wrong? Well, you got to know what the problem is before you know if it's right or wrong. So you need to first identify what problem it is you're solving. And that was never done by anyone with regard to 9/11, except there's only been one comprehensive forensic investigation in the public domain. I don't know anything about, that's classified. And this includes government agencies, too. And that is the investigation I conducted. I know that sounds a little bit, strange, but that it is true. That even, the Congress had mandated NIST, National Institutes of Standards and Technology, to determine why and how the towers collapsed. Well, then they admitted to me that they didn't, determine, they didn't analyze the collapse. They just assumed it. There's no other report in the public domain. Now, first you look at what happened. Now, the difference between the empirical approach and the experimental approach, if you start off assuming, you come up with a theory or a hypothesis, and then you go out and cherry pick data to support the hypothesis, it's sort of like, sort of a type of incest. You're proving what you set out to prove, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you identify what the problem was. You're just working on your imagination. And
True.
If the folks promoting thermite as the how, without determining what happened, is meaningless, because thermite did, what was the problem again? What did it do? And this Casey Anthony fiasco that happened about a little over a year ago here, I think it was pretty much heard around the world. I was giving a talk in Italy, and they'd even heard about it there, in a non-English speaking country. The problem with that case was the prosecution had failed to determine what happened. Mm-hmm. So they couldn't convict somebody of, what was the crime now? They hadn't determined what the crime was.
Exactly.
It doesn't mean the person's guilty or innocent or whatever. You don't have a crime yet. You haven't done your homework. So it's so important to first start out with what happened. Otherwise, you just end up with theories upon speculation about hearsay. I think your guest last week talked about myths, and I now really get a good idea of where myths come from. It's just stories that get told. Maybe because people can't handle the truth. So the difference between this, starting with the answer and working backwards, and starting forwards and just working to wherever you go, the part about starting out with the evidence, that's called the empirical method. It is part of the scientific method if you want to get technical on those descriptions. And it is the only way to proceed within a situation that you don't really have a good handle on what's happening yet. You need to take in all of the data, not just some of it, and take in as much as you can. So that's the approach that I took. And you just keep collecting data. As I say, let the data speak to you. Let the evidence speak to you. It'll tell you exactly what happened. If you don't know what happened, keep listening to the evidence until you do, because the evidence always speaks the truth.
Yes.
Now, a theory is for predicting future things, like the theory of gravity. You want to predict what happens, empirically, but you can. It's for also describing something in nature, but it's not for determining empirically what happened. You don't start out with a theory. Yep.
Exactly. And this is probably what most of the guys out there have done, really, because they're looking at what potentially could have caused the collapse of these towers and turned them into, dust piles or whatever.
Let me intersect here and say, yes, I'm famous for that. You're assuming a collapse. If you assume a collapse, then you look for evidence to support a collapse.
Exactly. Well, let's get to the bottom of that, shall we? Because that's
okay.
We have some very powerful entities in the media that can that have us think whatever they want us to think, really, or the masses, that is. So let's do that.
And it is so amazing how easily people, the power of suggestion there. So if you first start looking at the scene, what's left, the debris field, you can call it. The media called it a pile, so you assume there's a pile there. It's pretty level. One fellow who came out from being buried in a few pieces said he felt like he walked out onto an empty football field. We start looking at what's there, the evidence you do have, and first you have this big circle around everything being possible, and you can start removing stuff from that circle and eliminating things. For example, there was 14 people in stairwell B that survived, and 2 above stairwell B, the first, second, third, fourth floors, and 2 above that level who survived where the building did not. There's one guy who just rode the dust wave down and laying on top of the stairwell B, using that general vicinity. And so these 14 people, plus the 2 others, did not complain of being cooked to death. They walked out. All of them, of the 14, walked out under their own power from the center of Tower 1, at first, second, third, and fourth floor. And that's essentially all that was left of Tower 1 at ground level, everything else. So you wonder, where did the building go? That was a big question I had. And, some other observations that document that was 24 or 26 hours after the event. Peter Jennings is in a studio, and George Stephanopoulos is at the scene. And Peter Jennings says, George, Jackie Judd has asked, and several others have been asking, where did all the rubble go? And George Stephanopoulos says, well, I've been asking around, and one volunteer, Robert Gerlinski, explained it all fell down into the ground, was pulverized, and evaporated.
Wow.
I feel sorry for him at that point, because
yes.
He's got to tell the world, what's happening there, and that's the best he can do.
Yeah. Oh, my God. It's ridiculous, isn't it?
But what it captures, though, is that there's very little material left. Now, why else would he be saying that? And I was really excited that day when I saw that. I actually saw that broadcast live, but that was the last I really heard people asking, where'd all the material go? And we hear, it was all shipped to China. Well, by the time the dust cloud, dissipated, by noon, there's pictures, that day, plenty of pictures that day where there's this particular one with an ambulance that was parked in front of Tower 1, and the ambulance is still there. It looks in good shape. Maybe the door might be bent a little bit, but there's no dings on it, not clobbered. It looks almost like in original condition, just covered with dust. That's street level. And there's no building left behind it, except for, a few piles of stuff. I hear
Dr.
that.
Judy, let's take a pause here. You can hear the music in the back. We've had an uninterrupted run since the poor 5 minutes at the start. So lovely, excellent. We are making some ground here, folks. Let's hope we can present a very flowing interview today. So back in a few short moments with Dr. Judy Wood. Yeah, get off that farm, Bob. Get off that farm. You don't want to be working for Maggie. So welcome back, friends and listeners. We have a very special guest, Dr. Judy Wood, today, and we are discussing what happened about 9/11 and the Trade Center. So if you can remember your thoughts from before the break, I'm sorry I can't help you with that. I've got so much on my mind with all this breaking, interrupted airways. So
that's quite all right. The most important thing, I think, for people to remember is to know what you know that you know, and know that everything else you don't know. And don't fill in that gap with speculation, theories, hypotheses, assumptions, and so forth. If you want to try out some ideas, step aside in a parallel world, and then get back to that. Keep your data clean. And that's so important, because otherwise assumptions get entered in as fact, and you assume it's true and keep going on, and pretty soon you're solving an imaginary problem. And that becomes the most important thing with any of these events. And I like to point out about the Sandy Hook event in Connecticut with the supposed school business and some shooting going on.
Yeah.
I look at that and say, what do I know that I know? Nothing. All right, done. Move on. Next. We can't do it. Can't go anywhere, because otherwise you're just dealing with assumptions and speculation and round, 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 round. Why waste your time on that?
Yeah. Look, I've been caught in my eagerness to get the truth out there. I've been caught with just for an example, the Sandy Hook thing. You post a video and you probably better not to, because it's so much disinformation. Then the next day, someone sends you a video that contradicts that one, and you don't know, well, should I post this one? Then the next day, there's another video that says they're all actors. Then there's another one that says that it happened at another place. Oh God!
But what I end up doing is sitting and looking. I haven't processed any of the evidence, because I don't like to contaminate my mind with things that I don't know. Know that I know, but I've seen a lot of people just really jumping on these bandwagons and really like gung ho. Like, why? What has led so many people to feel like that's the most important thing to focus on? When it's just something to speculate about. And that's the most puzzling part. But I choose to put my energies. But this is my area, to know what I know that I know, and be careful not to make assumptions. Actually, Occam's razor, the definition that I like is that to minimize assumptions. So how do you minimize assumptions? Look at as much evidence as you can. And I don't place, everything, all the eggs in one basket based on one photo or one piece of data or one testimony, but they all kind of, when they start aiming at the same problem, like, for example, do you think there's a lot of dust in Manhattan?
Well, there was.
We have a whole lot of different sources of that conclusion. And what I've discovered is, in looking at this, that the towers didn't burn up, nor did they collapse and slam to the ground. They turned into dust in midair. And the most, clear way of determining that is if they'd slammed to the ground, you'd have a pile of rubble left over, a big pile. It didn't happen. And if they slammed to the ground, the water retaining wall around, to keep the Hudson out would have been ruptured. And that didn't happen. So most people don't realize that the towers were built in the Hudson River on the bedrock that was 70, that's times 10, 70 feet below the water table. And there's this dike built around the towers. So if you drop, 1 million tons of building on that, it's gonna rupture it somehow. At least. If not, destroy it completely. And the subways and, over to New Jersey and around southern Manhattan would have been flooded, and, you would have trashed lower Manhattan. Didn't happen. And the third thing, if you had buildings slamming to the ground, the seismic charts would have reflected that. And they did not. Mm-hmm. So exactly. That becomes pretty, convincing. But then there's a whole bunch of other weird things. But let's start eliminating things, we can toss out of our circle and tighten up our circle. We had these survivors in Stairwell B. They didn't describe bombs going off. They didn't describe being cooked to death. I mean, they're alive and well, and they managed to get themselves out, which was pretty heroic, considering they looked down these big, huge caverns below them because, there wasn't stuff in the basement. And that wasn't significant material in the basement, for sure. And so, somebody would throw them rope and they'd have to, narrowly walk across some plank. It was this, 70-foot hole below them. Mm-hmm. And they made it out. And one piece, and Ladder 6, that was the ladder company that was trapped in there with Josephine, the civilian, and a few others. They didn't lose anybody from their group. That was pretty cool.
Oh,
they all
wow.
made it out.
Yeah.
And then, you look at that, and they didn't get cooked to death. But you also, I think, adding in some other observations, we didn't see any paper burning much. We saw a lot of unburned paper. There may have been a piece here or there. It looked like it was burning. But if you have, mountain ranges of paper all over southern Manhattan, you don't have a big bonfire. You kind of wonder about the heat. And also who were mowed down by the dust cloud. Remember the pictures of dust clouds chasing people down the road?
Oh, yeah.
It caught up with them, passed them, just left them covered with dust. Choking and coughing up of the dust, but they didn't get cooked. And I've got a picture of a guy, you can see where his tie was. There's a white spot in his shirt where his tie was, but everything else is just covered with this same color, brownish, grayish fuzz of dust. So the dust cloud was not hot enough to cook anything. And actually, first responders I've talked with said that it was cooler than ambient temperature initially.
Wow. Well, that's interesting because they talk about what's that heat cloud that comes from volcanoes?
Pyroclastic.
Pyroclastic wave, yeah. So that would have cooked them, wouldn't it? If it was really, really hot and thermate and nukes, I mean, that would have just eaten away their skin, wouldn't it?
Oh, yeah, and the trees, there's bushy trees with leaves still on them that didn't get burnt. And there's, buildings didn't get burnt, signs didn't get burnt. I didn't really see anything that got burnt. But the cars...
Yes. Oh, thank goodness, you're back. Did you drop off too?
I think so.
Yeah, I
think so. That connection's toast.
Okay. Well, the last thing I heard from you, you were about to speak about the cars. You said nothing was burnt but the cars.
The cars were toasted, and I was going into the description of being toast. It's toast as in its history is toast. Like the connection was, like that connection was.
Yeah.
It was toast. You got to get another car. You can't fix that one. It's The
reason for that.
Go ahead.
What was the reason for the cars being toasted then? How did that happen?
We're not going to jump to conclusions here. We're just going to notice patterns. But to help notice the patterns, that's why I come up with this new vocabulary to kind of take away bias. Like the fumes coming out of the ground, if you called it smoke, you'd assume fire was the cause. Just like if people assumed the cars were burnt. The cars, they're toast. They're toasted beyond repair. But we start looking at the patterns, and you see the cars are toasted, but the trees aren't, the buildings aren't, the signposts aren't. And I didn't see any toasted people, going down those. And when they got toasted is another interesting pattern. First, the towers, went to dust, and dust went up and out and every which way, but it went up to the point of blocking out 100% of the sunlight for a few minutes. The firefighters would say they couldn't see their hand in front of their face. But then, thank goodness, that car lit up, because then I could see where I was. So that tells us the timing. It was after. I'm back.
Oh, I'm back too. Okay, so we're still on the cars. If you can continue on there. Sorry about this. And
the trees, nice bushy green leaves, and they're not toasted. Neither are the buildings. Neither are the signposts. The traffic lights are still going. You can see you get a green light or a red light. They're still cycling through. So it's bizarre that these cars were toasted, but we know the timing of it. It was right after the demise of the towers. When the dust cloud went up, blocked out sunlight, cars started toasting. And if some of the firefighters said initially water had no effect on these fires, these apparent fires. I got to be careful not to assume fire. It's apparent fire, what looked like and it's some stuff like plastic. not melted, but the metal completely, toasted. Heat doesn't do that. Also, there's vehicles where there's an abrupt line between completely toasted and not toasted at all. Fire doesn't do that either.
Mm-hmm.
There's no indication of exploded gas tanks. But there were police cars with bullets in them. The bullets were exploding. And I think I even I've heard them, the first responders talking about that, but then I actually recently, in the past week, have come across a video where you hear this. It sounds like a bunch of gunshots, and I'm wondering what that was. But the dust rolled out and then went up. That's another weird thing. Controlled demolitions, the dust is made at the ground. When the chunks of building slam, the bombs slice and dice the building, the chunks fall down, slam to the ground, and when they hit the ground, they get busted up more so that, people can slice them up more and put them on trucks and haul it away. But here, buildings were turning into dust before they hit the ground. And that's, something we've never seen before. That's why it's so important to go slowly with what we're assuming, what we're not assuming, and whatnot. If I just tell you the answer, then people start arguing about opinions over it. It's so important for us to be able to see what is before us, and for each of us to understand what we see. If you think about it, how did we get in the situation we're in? We've turned our thinking over to someone else's keeping.
True.
It's time we each take it back.
True.
I often think that World War III's already started. It's all psychological.
Mm-hmm. It is. Yep. For sure.
And 9/11 seems to be sort of the opening move. Imagine around the world how many people saw the images on their TV set of what was happening. Yet few people said, wait a minute, that building's turned to dust. It's not collapsing. That's scary to realize how easily people can be hoodwinked about that. But in any case, we're thinking about it now. So we're looking at, the pieces of the puzzle. And there's something that... Oh, here we go.
Lovely. Break time. Excellent. Thank you for picking that up. Alrighty, so we'll go to a short break and then we'll come back with more. Thanks, Dr. Judy, and thank you, listeners, for bearing with us. We are having technical problems, but we shall overcome. Back in a few short moments.
Yo, what's up? Check this out. The voice of the revolution. American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.
Oh, okay. Not sure where we were at the break. Talking about cars.
Yeah, let's.
We back?
Yes, we're back. Please.
Oh, okay. So we're noticing that the toasted cars, were toasted, but the buildings next to them, the paper underneath them and in the road, and the trees weren't toasted. And the cars are up on rubber tires. Just like when the back end of a car is not toasted, the front end is. This abrupt line, there's some sort of as it builds up, it can't discharge fast enough because the car's up on rubber tires. That's just a clue. But we continue on, and there was no big jolts in the seismic chart. Not only that, if a building slams to the ground and the building's on bedrock, it's like hitting a tuning fork with a hammer. It should ring all the way to the seismic recording stations. Yet none of the seismic recording stations picked up any S wave or P wave. The shear wave or the primary wave, those two waves travel through the Earth. The only waves that were picked up by the seismic station were surface waves. Like what you would get if you get off your mattress in the morning, the mattress bounces up. It rebounds, or getting off the sofa. But, if you slam a building down on bedrock, it's going to, ring it like a tuning fork. But none of those gave off S wave or P waves. So that's another problem. another evidence that the building didn't slam to the ground. And folks say, well, maybe that's the case for bombs exploding above ground. The Seattle Kingdom in Seattle was brought down by controlled demolition. It made equal or greater seismic equivalent for the measured through the surface wave than the towers. And it's much smaller of a building. And the same or greater. Then there's also a gas storage facility in New Jersey that got overfilled and exploded, and it made a much bigger seismic signal, and it also made an S wave and a P wave. So the only were built oven. Now, some people don't realize that there were 7 buildings destroyed that day. Some of them just went missing, or large parts of them went missing. Like approximately the middle 50% of Building 6 went missing. Almost all of Building 3 went missing. And the main body of Building 4 went missing. You have cylindrical cutouts in Building 5. These were all buildings with a WTC prefix. Kind of interesting. Coincidence?
Very.
And so you keep adding up all of the evidence, and especially the buildings were turning to dust. You see steel beams falling. And you look.
Okay, looks like we've dropped off again. My apologies, folks. But there you go. These are the things that are happening. So let's just wait for a few more seconds. Shouldn't be long. We'll have our guest back, Dr. Judy Wood.
Oh, I assume we're back.
We're back. We're back.
Oh, great. So you have buildings with a WTC prefix that were destroyed that day, not the buildings across the street. There's Bankers Trust had damaged, but it wasn't destroyed that day. It was damaged. They repaired it. But then they decided after they repaired it that they needed to take it apart. There's a lot of interesting things like that. And you start looking at all of the different pieces of evidence. Okay, looking at it right away, we can throw out thermal weapons, and we can throw out bombs that go boom that would leave a seismic imprint, because we didn't have that. And also when bombs go boom, chunks go flying. They stay chunks until they hit something else. And if you're getting this building to the ground in a short amount of time, the ground only shook for 8 seconds. And it takes 9.5 seconds to drop a bowling ball off the roof and have it hit the ground. Yet the ground shook for only 8 seconds. So, what's with that? The building didn't slam to the ground. But if it's, the ground shaking for 8 seconds, you wonder if that's the length of time it took to turn the building into dust finally, or that it took less than that, and it just took the 8 seconds for the signals to dampen out. But whatever the case is, that's for Tower 1, it was 8 seconds, which is pretty peculiar. Now, if you're going to squash that building down to the ground in 8 seconds, let's imagine the pancake or progressive collapse. If you're going to squash all that down, well, there wasn't a big pile of stuff left over, so that stuff had to go somewhere. Let's say each floor gets pulverized with all the stuff squirting out every window. When you squash it down to the ground, that dust has got to be squirting out of there at greater than Mach 1, halfway down. And that's the average speed. From the center, the air of the center has to be going in excess of Mach 2 before the thing's down to the ground. So all of the adjacent buildings should look like they've been machine gun fired, right? Didn't happen. The facade on the adjacent buildings is pretty much in good shape, with the exception of a few stab wounds, like, beam going through it here or there. And there's window glass damage, which is peculiar, where it's a double pane window. One pane's broken, but the other pane isn't. And the outer pane having like a round hole or a rounded hole in it, but no crack going to the corners. Some strange things like that. So you keep adding this evidence up. If it was a bomb that went boom, bombs go boom because they're exceeding the speed of sound, and you have this shock wave that goes out. You have junk flying, like a Coke can on the windowsill is a projectile. it put dings in the building across the street. Didn't happen. Got the break coming up.
We do, sister. Thank you very much. Look, that was a very interrupted hour, but we did get quite a lot of information out there nonetheless. We are coping here. We are absolutely overcoming. So hang in there, folks. After the break, we will come back and open the caller lines. Bear with us. Thank you very much. American Freedom Radio with Santos Bonacci for the next hour. We have had a very troubled first hour.
I'm back.
Yeah, we are. We're back.
Okay.
All righty. Let's continue then while we make hay while the sun's shining.
Okay. Well, we can jump to, there's different kinds of devices. There's, break it up into three groups. There's, thermal energy, kinetic energy, and direct.
Are we back?
I'm here.
You having fun?
Oh, yeah. I was just talking about what kinetic energy versus thermal energy versus directed energy, and, what things are capable of. The buildings didn't get cooked to death, so we throw out, and keep talking, that there's thermal, kinetic energy, and directed energy. Directed meaning, it doesn't physically contact. It isn't like a hammer hitting something, or a wrecking ball, or missile, bomb. Are we there yet? Are there callers that will be calling in? Am I on the air by myself, or is there someone else? If there's a caller, that would be great. So we can unmute a caller and I can talk to them, see what their question is. I'll continue on with my soliloquy. It's important to know what you know that you know, and know that everything else you don't know. And whenever you're in doubt, go back to what you know that you know, and make the fewest number of assumptions. And that can be real challenging because we automatically assume things without realizing it. Like a lot of people assume there was high heat, even though there's no evidence of high heat. There's plenty of evidence to the contrary, like the West Street was flooded due to a broken water main on the afternoon of 9/11, and firefighters were waiting in like knee-deep water, and they didn't burn up or get cooked. Paper didn't burn. We saw what appeared to be fires, but there'd be firefighters walking right through it. It wasn't like anyone was concerned that the fires were spreading. And what was this fire about anyway? Why was it that after the dust cloud rolled out, you get cars lighting up spontaneously? That is mighty strange. Apparent spontaneous combustion. So I'm not sure if there's going to be a caller. I'm not sure if Santos is going to be getting back online. Not sure if I'm, let's see. Well, there's some concerns that people have about there being thermite. But you first need to figure out what the problems you're solving. What caused someone to think of thermite? Well, they've heard of something in a dust baggie, some sample of dust. Well, the building primarily turned to dust. So you're going to have every constituent of the building in the dust. And you're going to have, traces of chocolate and sugar and nano-wheat, flour in the dust. But that wouldn't prove that there's chocolate chip cookies that turn the buildings to dust. It wouldn't even prove that those ingredients had been combined to make chocolate chip cookies in the building. And the same thing is true for thermite. Just because you find some of the constituents in the dust that make thermite, they also make buildings, and the building turned to dust. The building frame structure, which is like 97% iron, and it was molecularly dissociated. The molecules came apart. And so you're going to have elemental iron that's going to rust pretty quickly. So you're going to have rust. And you're going to have, with the aluminum cladding, you're going to have aluminum powder. So you have powdered aluminum and iron oxide. There was a tremendous amount of that in the dust. And after all, where did the building go? And where did that dust come from? But before you can get to that end point, it's so important to first take in all of the data. And if we look at, the empirical method, it's to generally characterize, it's a collection of the large amount of evidence before speculating about the significance of any of the evidence, or without much of an idea of what to expect. And for those who have been taught that you must start with a theory and then do experiments, what you're doing is starting out with what you expect to find. So you're just, feeding on itself. And so it's important to just take in all the evidence. And if you keep looking at the evidence, it becomes clear what happened. In my book, I take people walk them through the evidence, and they can sit and look at it and come up to whatever conclusions they want to come up with. It shouldn't be threatening to anyone, except, there's the consequences. A lot of folks don't want to handle the consequences, so they want to reject the data. I think Santos is not connected. So if you're going to determine what happened of a situation you know nothing about, you really need to begin with the empirical method of just collecting evidence, as much evidence as you can, until it becomes clear. Empirical evidence. Now I often say this quote that I like. Empirical evidence is the truth that theory must mimic, and not the other way around. You begin with the evidence. The evidence is the truth. Evidence is the artifact that truth left behind. It's another way of looking at it. And if you're going to come up with a theoretical model, it better mimic the truth. And this came up with a theoretical model of the demise of Building 7, except it didn't mimic what happened. Almost did. It wasn't too far off. But what they did is model it with disintegrating elements. So it kind of tells you that might have been what happened. So I need to keep talking about myself, so I'm doing a soliloquy here. Not sure what else to... I could read some segments from... No, I guess I don't know if I'm on air or off, and... If we're on a break, I think they said the break was coming up in 2 minutes.
Lovely, and we are back, friends. We have had a lot of interruptions today, so please bear with us. We're back again, and we have our guest with us. I was thrown off at the last segment, so I didn't hear any of that, but I presume we can, Dr. Judy, I presume we can just take off from where we left off there, if you don't mind.
Oh, what I think is important to talk about is, the truth is known, but why do so few people know it? Or why don't many people want to know it is the question. And I think it's vital for our survival even. It could very well be for our survival that we understand what happened and be able to recognize it, not if, but when it happens again. And I think our ability to recognize it might actually help deter it from happening again. But understanding what it was that happened is so important. Yeah.
Look, I'm so disappointed I didn't catch all your information, but I did hear you talking about the three kinds of, you talked about nukes, you talked about thermite, and you talked about direct energy something?
Directed. It's directed as in,
Yep.
You think of it as instructed energy. You instruct it. Directions to do something differently that it normally does, and also you direct it geographically to do something here and not over there.
Yes. Did you elaborate on that? Because I would have missed it if you did. I would have loved to have caught up with that, because it sounds like they would have been the weapons of choice, yeah?
Well, I don't look at it from what somebody would choose, but I look at it from what the evidence says. When the evidence says, as we're talking about, you can kinetic energy weapons, like, wrecking balls, nukes, missiles, slingshots, big nukes, little nukes, bombs, the things that hit something else, a kinetic energy weapon. We can eliminate that because we would have seen the fingerprint of that, like, seismic signals. And also when you're mashing the building down to the ground, that stuff's got to fly out, and it would come out in like machine gun firing on adjacent buildings, which didn't happen. Mm-hmm. And the evidence points to the fact the building turned to dust in midair. And thermal energy doesn't do that either. Buildings weren't cooked to death. So you can also eliminate laser beams from space. For people who like to talk about that. And the only thing we're left with is the directed energy, not direct. One type of directed energy is line of sight, direction-wise, but directed as in giving it instructions, also as in directing it to go here, not there. Like, bombs tend to just go boom, radially go all over. You can't really control that well which way they go. So some type of directed energy weapon. It was used as a weapon. Energy that was directed and used as a weapon. And within that, we can throw out kind of things like lasers because the buildings weren't cooked to death. But after we look at all the different types of phenomena that were recorded there, we can also look at things that produce that same type of phenomena. And there are parallel types of phenomena, but it's so important to look at the evidence. I can't tell you the serial number of the gizmo that did it, but I can tell you just what it does. And that's more important than anything. If you need a name for it, I can tell you by what it does. It produces magnetic electrogravitic nuclear reactions. And I don't really want to shorten that up into any fancy code word, because that puts a veil of mystery over it. It involves magnetism, electricity, gravity, and it produces nuclear reactions. Not a nuke bomb, but nuclear reactions, where you get transmutations, odd things like that. There's evidence of that with the tritium measurements found. And it's also it's similarities with regard to other types of low energy nuclear reactions that you get from what was formerly cold fusion. I'm not saying that is exactly what it is, but that you see some similarities in there. Also, Hudson, he gets transmutation in the samples that he is subjected to. His devices, and he uses, same kind of thing. Involves, magnetism, electricity, gravity, and produces nuclear reactions. But we can also use that for good. We can use it to produce free energy for the planet. But he who controls the energy controls the people. So, those who are in control of this gizmo probably don't want to give it up. But if we all recognize it, if everyone knows that free energy technology exists, people don't get suicided by developing this in the secrecy of their basement. They can develop it in broad daylight. Everybody can.
Yeah.
So that's one of the other big things with this is, right now to go to believe in free energy technology, you have to go to somebody's lab and witness it, but then nobody else can come witness it, and everyone's always going to be skeptical of that. Or was it?
I love that. I thought that was a mistake, but that was so good. Very well done.
Those things produce heat, lots of it. And you would have had this, you see a big nuke go off, people get blinded by the light, right?
Yes, exactly. And that was not there. That was not there. Definitely not there. Wow. So, and where would they have had their directed energy devices? Where would they have had those located? Would they be far or close by?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I wasn't part of the party involved. So somebody who can reproduce all of the same evidence.
How will have to...
What?
Yeah, sorry about that. I got chopped off. But the how of it all will have to...
So that's what works as a good analogy, because you need a cell phone and you need to be within range of the tower to have a conversation. One without the other. So you don't care where you are within range as long as you're within range. And so if it's an interference type thing where you need both things, it isn't a matter of where your cell phone's located. It's or where the cell phone tower is located. It's where both are relative to each other. And so within range.
Exactly. Well, wonderful.
We didn't talk about the hurricane. There was a Category 3 hurricane right outside of Manhattan.
That's right.
It was headed towards Manhattan for 4 days. And then at 8 a.m. it was about the closest to Manhattan. Then that afternoon it turns around and starts heading out of town. Now, there's some reasons kind of for it, turning around. There's this high pressure system moving in. There's never been a hurricane that's made a U-turn like that. But, okay, this high pressure system moving in, they thought the hurricane was going to turn around day 1. It didn't. They thought it was going to turn around day 2. It didn't. Then they thought it was going to turn around day 3. It didn't. Then they thought it was going to turn around day 4. It's a good thing it did, because they're out of time. The outer bands of the hurricane, it actually got bigger when it was closest to Manhattan. I mean, it's not where the eye is located to relative to Manhattan, but the size of the thing. It got bigger, like a figure skater putting out their arms and slowing down. And the outer bands were even over Cape Cod. It was raining there. And it was there was thunder recorded at the 3 major airports surrounding Manhattan: LaGuardia Airport, JFK Airport, and Newark airports. So that was close enough to produce the field effects seen outside of storm systems approaching. But my question is, I don't speculate on exactly how it got there, but just, look at what you know that you know. But I do have a big question as why didn't they give any warning to the folks in Manhattan? Maybe it was a voluntary evacuation, and then, the day before it might be a mandatory evacuation. Unless they know 100% sure of where that hurricane's going to go, how can they be 100% sure? Enough to just not even mention it to the folks. There's it wasn't that it was not mentioned at all. It was underreported, not non-reported. It was underreported, and it played down, and people don't remember there was a hurricane there. It had more cyclonic energy in that storm system than Hurricane Katrina. It wasn't.
Are you talking about on 9/11?
On 9/11.
Yeah. And so how was it that the hurricane turned around? How was that?
There's a high pressure system that was coming from the west eastward. At the same time, the hurricane was going westward, and the two storm systems met, right there on 9/11. But how would they know? How would they know? Because if you're out, a few hours, as it was, I think they shut down Atlantic City Beach because the undertow from the storm. But the general public wasn't aware of that.
Well, I wasn't. I had no idea about this storm at all. I've never heard of this. Never even heard of it. That's amazing.
I mean, before today?
Yeah, before today. It might have slipped me. Yeah.
Look up Hurricane Aaron. Actually, I was on a radio show. We'll come after the break.
Done. Okay, off to the break, folks. Back for the last segment. And for the callers, I have 2 callers on the panel, but I cannot unmute you as I do not have all the facilities on the... Welcome back, friends and listeners, for the last segment of the show today. Special guest, Dr. Judy Frank. And unfortunately, we've had a very interrupted show, and I've already suggested to Dr. Judy that we will have her back in June when I get back from Ecuador, and hopefully all those little technical problems will have disappeared. But I'd like to take this opportunity now, before we get interrupted again, Dr. Judy, to thank you very much for coming on with us and sharing your research with us, and thank you for bearing with the show and not packing up and taking off in frustration. So, thank you. And can you please give people, the listeners, perhaps your best presentation on video that you've done, your website, all your contact details, while we've got a good line, because I think they may have missed that in the introduction when I introduced you. Please, if you could do that.
Great. Thank you. The best presentation is from the Energy Conference, Breakthrough Energy Movement Conference this past November. And that video is at the top of my homepage, drjudywood.com. That's drjudywood, all one word, .com. And from there's also links to the book site. And the book site, if you want to go there directly, is Where Did the Towers Go? This is in the just wheredidthetowersgo.com. And you can, see other information on there as well. And there's, hello.
We're back.
Okay.
Okay. Now, was that me only that was offline, or was it both of us?
I was offline.
Okay. Well, we've got 3 to 4 minutes before the end, so I'll hand it over to you. We've already got your websites out. We've done as much as we can considering the circumstances today. So let's just write this one off for now, and we'll do this again in June, as I promised the listeners. And just finish it off if you'd like, Sister. It's over to you.
Okay, well, thanks. Just finished where I had left off, which was saying how about my website. A lot of people complain that it's not a storefront, polished thing. That's because it's a file cabinet of my evidence. And I learned that dead people keep secrets. I didn't want to be one of those. Why was I going to keep secrets? I was just John Hutchison's work and the similarities with what happened on 9/11. And various other things like that. You can get lost in there. There's a tremendous amount of evidence, and it's there to look at, to take in, so that you can make your own conclusion. I don't like to tell people what to think, but just ask them to think their own thoughts. That keeps us human. Otherwise, we're just trained lab rats. So if we can think for ourselves and own our own thoughts, and it will. So, are there any questions you'd like to ask?
Oh, not really, but that was well said. Think for yourself and have your own thoughts, listeners. We encourage the listeners here at this station to do so, and we know that the calibre of listener here is of that kind. So, think for your question of authority. A little bit of self. Yeah, it's